It was my grandma's birthday on Wednesday. She's a St. Patrick's Day baby. And we're going to go to a socially distanced outdoor lunch for her birthday. I'm going to bring the C70, try to film some slow motion, family stuff, still just kind of see how it operates. I really haven't used a camera with like a slow and fast or S&Q mode extensively, so I really want to test that out. And then when we get back, we'll take a look at the charts that we filmed yesterday. Also, I put the top handle on the camera. It's not something I thought I would like. We'll see if I get used to it or if I just take it off and put it back in the box. I also thought it would be fun to bring the 9-bot scooter, but Gilbert gave me a pro tip that if I put a carabiner on this little bendy hook thing that hooks the handlebars to the wheel, if I could take my 9-bot scooter, run and go get groceries, and I can hang my bags there, and it should still latch even with the carabiner stays there. So pro tip for you 9-bot max scooter gang out there, nobody else is riding a 9-bot scooter but Gilbert and I. Also, safety first. So we're taking a look at the footage I filmed yesterday of these charts, and I'm not a professional colorist. This wasn't done super scientifically. This is just answering two questions for me, and that's if this C70 is, relatively color accurate, and if it isn't, what do I need to do to make it that way? And is the 0.71 mount adapter, RF mount to EF mount adapter sharp enough for me? This is, I'm going to do this for my own knowledge. I hope this is helpful for someone else, but, this is not something I'm going to do on every project either. I'm not pulling out the chip chart, making sure I'm color accurate Most of the time, I'm adjusting my white balance to taste. I'm changing my white balance to look warm, cool, green, or magenta based on how I want the thing to feel. I'm very rarely taking the chip chart and always being color accurate every single time. But when I get a new camera, this is something I like to do just to kind of see my bearings where this camera stands. So hopefully this is helpful for you, and if it isn't, let me know why in the comments, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it'll make me cry. Okay, so in this Final Cut timeline, also, I'm doing this in Final Cut, like, you know, people should probably be doing this in DaVinci Resolve, but I don't know enough about DaVinci Resolve to do this as comfortably as I can in Final Cut, so, Okay, so I've got Final Cut open, I've got my waveform, I've got my vector scope, I've got the inspector open, and I've got all of the clips and I've got them labeled. So I have the sharpness, focus chart, and the chip chart for every setting of the camera. So I've got the C70 with the 16 to 35 at 35. I've got it with the Sigma 135. I've got it with the, now without the 0.71 speed booster, focal reducer. Both lenses. I have the C200 in 8-bit at C-Log 3. And then both lenses. And then I have the C200 in the 12-bit RAW. Can you hear Lauren's cat meowing in the background? He's hungry. It's dinner time. I already fed him. I don't know. He didn't see me feed him, so he needs to go check his bowl. Okay, so I'm going to start with the color so I can kind of see how the colors look here. Now, this is C-Log 2, so it's very desaturated. It doesn't have a lot of saturation. And in fact, I need to turn off my text because that's interfering with my waveform here. Okay, let's kind of pull up just the chips of the chip chart. So I'm going to go to my masks. I'm going to quickly draw a mask on this and just kind of get these points here. All right, so I've got colors, skin tones, gray to, shades of gray from white to black. So now I can use my vector scope and my waveform and the color tools to make sure my color is looking good. Okay, so I'm going to start by, just pulling things up, pulling my highlights up. I like the Final Cut wheels because I can pull this way up. I can pull these way down, although I don't need to pull it super duper far down. And just doing that brought out the different colors on the vector scope, but it's still pretty hard to see, what is, are these pointing directly at these boxes? Essentially what I need are these spikes here to point directly into these colors. Into these boxes. And then this here is the skin tone stuff, these chips right here, and I need these to be on this line. So to do that without, I can keep blasting these, but I want my white to just be here, and I want the black to almost touch the bottom there. Almost, not quite. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring up this saturation. Now, I've heard that ideally to have it properly, colorized, we want our saturation to sit somewhere in the middle. So what we want is all of these dots to hit these boxes and then be halfway from center. Now, you can already see some of these are not skewed perfectly into these. And what I did with that light, like I mentioned yesterday, my aperture tri-8 isn't super duper color accurate, but I really didn't want to take this light. So I on the gray card, clip, I used the white balance tool in the camera to white balance to that light. So, you know, these should be pretty close even with my not great light. But we can already see that, like, the red's not perfectly hitting the box. Blue is pretty off. Green and yellow are kind of missing. Cyan's missing a little bit. So either part of this is like I didn't white balance perfectly, or you know, this just isn't accurately pulling colors. Now, you can kind of see something of the, like, you know, people like to say that Canon's color science does skew red, and we can see this. Red is the, you know, closest, most saturated color here. So that, you know, this is the proof that Canon colors kind of skew red. So yeah, I'm gonna, like, just keep pushing these, try to get them closer to these boxes. Although they will eventually kind of hit, they all kind of hit a certain point. So I can't, you know, I can't keep going. So I'm gonna kind of get to right as they, like, the red kind of hits its most saturated point, and also blue kind of hits it too about the same time. And then I'm gonna switch over to hue versus hue. So I've got my color wheels. This is kind of essentially doing my, like, transform from log to Rec 709. Also, I probably should have been in the BT 2020 color space, but HDR is weird and I still don't get it. And most of the stuff I'm doing is you know, SDR anyway. So I've got, oh, not color curves. Dang it, I need hue and saturation curves. Okay, so if I go to my inspector, I now have three. I have my mask, I have my color wheels, and these curves. I don't need this anymore, so I'm gonna delete it. Okay, back to my hue and saturation curves. What I can do under hue versus hue, I can grab each of these colors. If I want to start with red, I can grab red. Now, when I do that, it makes 3 dots. So I want to delete that one. That way, you know, yes, there's only one control point, so if I move it, the whole line's gonna move, but I'm gonna make dots for all of the colors here. So I got red, yellow, purple, we'd call that magenta, I guess, blue, and cyan. But that's the blue. It kept that dot, so I don't want to delete that dot necessarily. And green. I'm going to delete the added dot. So now I have red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, magenta, or purple. And what I can do is I can now grab these dots and kind of push them towards the color. So if I push that red one up, now red is actually pointing to its accurate color. Magenta is mostly pointed at the box correctly. Yeah, so I just move that just a little bit. My blue, all right, now that's pointing at the box. Cyan and green and yellow. All right, so now they're pointing towards their respective box. And my skin tone is pretty close there on that line. Now, if I take the dropper and I grab, you know, the skin tone option, it's really, you know, it's basically red. But I can it's kind of orange, and I can kind of straighten that out as well. And you know, all of these skin tones, they're different brightnesses of skin tone, but they're essentially all the same. You know, everybody's got red blood under their skin, so regardless of whichever of these skin tones I would have selected, they all move together. Okay, so now my colors are accurate, but my colors are, you know, they're saturated a little differently. So what I can do is go to hue versus saturation and essentially select all of the colors again and just grab the colors. And I can make them all equal distance from one another. So the red, actually I'm gonna go ahead and just put them all in the box. Well, I don't know. This is where my knowledge gets a little weird or lacking. I'm gonna put them all in the box, and then I'm gonna pull my master saturation down because this is way too saturated. And I can't quite get the cyan all the way, but as I pull blue, cyan really gets close there. Oh, I ended up with an extra dot. Yeah, I can't quite get magenta and blue. So maybe I'll dial everything back. And it's a lot of push and pull. You know, I can, as I move one, another moves sometimes, especially with cyan and blue. But yeah, can I get these about equal distance from one another? See, but I've got to boost the yellow back up if I pull the red away, and now magenta's kind of too close. And I guess, you know, like I said, I'm kind of aiming for the halfway point. And that's the bummer thing about the Final Cut vector scope, is it doesn't exactly have that halfway ring. That would be super handy. So if anyone on the Final Cut team is watching this video, I would love that. I would love for Final Cut to have the ring in here to kind of get my equal distance of saturation right. I don't know. I feel like green is still too far. So obviously these curves aren't straight. If this was a perfect camera, if I white balanced to, and you know, perfect is subjective, but if I white balance this camera, that circle, you know, once a Rec 709 transform happened, this would be you know, perfectly set, and you know, these would set properly. Now let's do that. Let's put Canon's official lookup table on this C-Log2 footage. So if I turn off my color wheels and my hue and saturation curves and go over to the info tab in Final Cut, in the inspector, in the info tab, and if you switch to, I think by default it's on basic, it's not there, you have to go to general or some of these other settings, but we can go to this camera LUT drop, or it has that camera LUT drop down. We can look this up, and there is a built-in Canon Log2 Cinema Gamut lookup table, and that's Apple's or Final Cut's lookup table for this. And in fact, when you film in XFABC or Canon Raw Light, the metadata tells Final Cut, it knows this is C-Log2 Cinema Gamut footage, and it will automatically apply this lookup table. So I usually turn it off. It's not as saturated and it's not as contrasty as the one directly from Canon, which in some ways is helpful because it gives you more latitude to grade further. So what we're doing is actually color correction. We're just making sure colors are accurate, and then you would do a grade on top of that for stylistic purposes. So yeah, it has more flexibility for a grade, and the Canon lookup table is more punchy. It's you know, a little more close to final. I don't like applying a lookup table here when I'm actually working, because then you have to apply your corrections on top of it. You have to like nail your exposure if you're going to use it in this level. The nice thing is it doesn't need rendering. But if I'm going to use a lookup table, I will apply it as an effect so that I can do corrections on a layer before that. If you're a a DaVinci Resolve editor, you could then do it nodally with the nodes. But I'm lazy and I'm still doing this in Final Cut. Okay, long story short, here's the Canon Log 2 Cinema Gamut lookup table from Apple. So yeah, this is not nearly as contrasty. It doesn't bring the highlights near as high up. That being said, I think I underexposed this first clips, but I just pulled the highlights up. And you know what? This does kind of bring these in line. The skin tone is right on the line, and these, actually the cyan is kind of sticking out further than anything, and the blue's kind of muted, but the red is in line with the footage. Okay, but that's Apple's lookup table that comes built into Final Cut. And in fact, when I imported this footage, it was on. I had to turn it off. So let's go to Cinema Gamut C-Log 2 BT709 YDR. So this is Canon's lookup table that transforms C-Log 2 to their YDR setting. And I've heard from people that it doesn't look like the YDR right out of the C70. And, every camera's a little bit different, except, the C70 and the C300 theoretically have the same sensor. But things could happen in software to make them a little different. And some people have said the C70 isn't like 100% the same as the C300. Software is different. That's fine. That happens. You work on it. And again, I think I underexposed this, so when I apply this lookup table, it is darker. But the lookup table is essentially the same. My blue is a little more muted, but all of these are even. So I would... Okay, if I was using this lookup table, which, the blue is, aside from the blue, it's pretty balanced because I white balance. So I would turn that off. I would in fact grab the effect for color, the lookup tables, custom lookup table, drop that on. I would apply that same lookup table, but before that layer, so I'm doing this out of order, but so I need to shift these around. So I have another color wheels. I would put this before that lookup table, and my corrections would happen before the lookup table because I underexposed this footage. I would bring this up. I would bring these down just a touch, and I really have to push and pull because the lookup table is taking, these values, and I need to bump it up, or these values, I need to bump it down. So like the differential between highlights and shadows are much more narrow. Although in my final image, I'm seeing this with that lookup table applied. I have to be much more granular with this change versus when I was doing it without the lookup table. So here's just that correction because I underexposed it. Now there's probably, I'm not going to get into like noise today. And honestly, noise doesn't bother me. I end up putting film grain on most of my stuff anyway, and most of my stuff ends up on YouTube, and YouTube kind of obliterates noise. Doesn't bother me. Not the end of the world. Yeah, the blue, again, well, yeah, after I made these corrections, the blue in this it's now the cyan that's not saturated as much, but the blue is actually not pointing at the box. Everything else is. So I would say this, Canon's lookup table, although people give it a lot of crap, I think is a decent transform. Skin tones are mostly on the line, and everything but blue is pretty spot on. So again, I would correct for this. I, would go in here and add another hue versus saturation curves, and I would try to fix my blue here and push it more to blue. And then I would grab my cyan that I feel is a little weak in the saturation department, and I would bump that up. And you know what? The red is sticking out a little far, so I could also go in here, grab the red, and pull that down a touch. And now I'm pretty close. But again, I want to do this before the lookup table, so now that's a little, yeah, you know, that's now a little exaggerated, so maybe this cyan can come down a touch, and in fact the red needs to come down more. And now I'm looking, I think, pretty accurate. I could then also maybe bump up saturation after the lookup table, because this saturation is a little under the halfway point, a little dull. But yeah, so that's doing it with the lookup table and without. And you would put the lookup table, it would be your corrections, your lookup table, and then your grade. And I'm doing this because Final Cut does its effects in order top to bottom, but if you were like in Resolve, and Premiere does that too. In Resolve, you would have your nodes and they would move from left to right. And the main advantage of like nodal stuff is you can like split things and move in parallel. But again, I don't know how to like maximize using that. I'm still a novice. I'm not a professional colorist. I'm just like, I'm making videos. I want them to look good. So here I am. So with Canon's lookup table, if I was using that as my base, my effect chain, looks like this. I'm kind of adjusting my highlights and my shadows, and mostly that's because I underexposed this clip. And my corrections, like this is really where it's like, is this accurate? And I would say this is very minimal changes with the Canon lookup table. Now, if I'm doing this totally, on my own, I am using these changes. I'm doing my correction for exposure, bumping up the saturation so I have something to work with, and then I'm making these changes. Now this looks like a lot, but the fact that there weren't a lot of changes to the Canon supplied lookup table means that this is pretty in line with what Canon thinks, this sensor. So yeah, I would say if I need to get a job done, I could save this. I can even save this as an effects preset in Final Cut, so I could just pull that up anytime I use the C70, and I just be like, quickly correct C70 C-Log 2. It'll bring up these curves, and that's great. But I'm doing all this, and I'm at the end I'm going to say I don't do this every time. In fact, I'm not going to do it on this video. I'm just doing this so I have the base knowledge of knowing this is where this goes. But here's probably what I'm most curious about. But here's the thing. So I'm going to take these changes I did. I just copied, and now I'm going to paste attributes, and I want to bring in not the mask, but the first set of color wheels and curves, because I just want to see this, and I'm kind of overexposing, and I left kind of a glare here. I shouldn't have done that. So I'm gonna go to my color wheels, kind of bring that down a little bit. Now, what I do want to look at here is how sharp is this. Now I was using autofocus, and I had the autofocus pointed at the center of this focus chart. So this is 100%. This is, pixel for pixel, what this looks like. And I, can make this full screen. No, that's just full screen. And this is not this isn't great. So what I would want to do is make this as big as possible. And again, and as you can guess, I'm just looking at my MacBook screen. I don't have again, I'm not a colorist, so I don't really have a color monitor. But this MacBook Pro screen is how I feel like I watch most of my stuff. It's either my MacBook or my iPad is where I'm watching stuff. So, yeah, I mean, here's what I'm looking at. And I'm going to save this as a workspace. Kyle Pixel Peep workspace. Cool. It's paused, so I'm in better quality anyway. This looks pretty sharp to me. I don't know. Maybe the other one will look sharper. So this is with the 0.71 mount adapter. Looks pretty sharp to me. You can turn on Do Not Disturb. There we go. No push notifications. 200%. We could jump in 400%. Now it's gonna look a little soft because it's blown up. I'm gonna see some softness, jagged edges, because I'm more than 100%. And I probably should have gotten closer, but I was already casting a shadow with my mic because I was like talking to the camera to keep track of what was what, rather than actually having like a post-it note there telling me what it was visually. Probably should have done that, but here we are. So this is what we're looking at. Let me go back to my color workspace. Yeah, I'm not clipping. Looks sharp enough to me. Cool. And bring that back up. So, the Sigma lens, the color is a little different. In fact, and I saw that because I did not change the white balance going from the 16 to 35, popped on the 135 Sigma, and I shot the focus chart because color accuracy not as big a deal for the color, and I did the chip chart, and then I white balanced again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy, or I already have the settings copied. I'm going to paste these settings here. And I only need these ones. And yeah, so like this looks close but different. The blue is a little less saturated, and this magenta, like it's not a lot, like it's bowing outward like a bone in my leg. The yellow's a little more saturated, and these are opposite ends of the spectrum, so it's just like that line is sliding over. Okay, so this clip is after I white balanced again, and yeah, and this was before, and basically what happens here to here is the whole thing kind of shifts over. I believe it was like the difference of like 100 Kelvin, and I don't think there was any green magenta shift between one to the other. So I think this lens was just a little, like 100 Kelvin cooler than the Canon lens. So really, if I wanted to really get that to shift over, I could go into the temperature slider here under the color wheels and probably just shift it over a little bit, and that would fix it. But yeah, I just wanted to see what that looked like. But here's the one that is pretty close color-wise. So I could just go to my Hue and Saturation and Hue versus Saturation, and I could bump up the blue a little bit and pull down the yellow a tiny bit, and now I'm back. So if I was filming with this lens on one camera, and let's theoretically say I had two of the same camera, and I filmed with this lens, a 16 to 35, and on the other camera, the Sigma 135, it'd be very, very close. I would just kind of shift my yellow-blue saturation if I perfectly wanted to nail it. But I think that, you know, this isn't too far off. Yeah, I probably wouldn't do it. I'd probably just be too lazy and just be like, this is close enough for jazz. Because you know, you saw I just moved it a tiny, tiny bit. So that's great. That's great to know. You know, I guess like I was just used to people saying that it was cooler, and I just assumed. And honestly, I didn't really do too much about it before when I would cross-contaminate my Canon lenses and my Sigma lenses in the same production. But, you know, maybe it was just the influence of someone telling me is what got me to think about it. I don't know. Okay, so let's see how sharp the Sigma is. Let's bump up to 100%. Let's hop over to my workspace that I made for pixel peeping. That just makes this a little bit bigger. So now we're jumping. I want to jump from here to here. You know, this is the Canon and this is the Sigma. And I don't know. You know, the framing's not exactly the same, but I would say this is sharp enough for me. You know, an independent person. You know, I work by myself or with a team at CMAC or with Gilbert on editor stuff. I would say this is tolerably sharp enough for me. And honestly, I'm thinking that even if this is less sharp than without the mount adapter, because we're going to look at that next. We're looking at the mount adapter without the focal reducer, the essentially magnifying glass inside of it. If that is sharper, I don't know how much more sharper it could be, and perceivably, I could probably apply a sharpness effect and get pretty close. I remember the No Life digital guy, the guy who kind of took the R5 and put a Ninja 5 on it and found that he could record in 4K high quality almost indefinitely that way, and the camera wouldn't overheat. And he was like, you know, 4K HQ versus regular 4K, how close can I get it with a sharpening effect? And he applied a little bit of sharpening to the non-HQ footage. And I get it, there's pixel binning and like there could be moire and you could be making that worse by adding sharpening, but he got it pretty close. On people's faces, you're not really gonna get like aliasing or moire, so he added a little bit of sharpening and it was very, very close. And I think this is going to be a similar situation. All right, I'm rambling on. We're already way, way long on this. If you've made it this far, kudos to you. So let's jump ahead and apply some of this color here. I'm treating this as my base. I probably should have started without the mount adapter and called that my true color. But here we are. I've already started. I'm not starting over. All right, let's paste attributes and apply the color. Let's see, is there a color shift that's happening from the 0.71 mount adapter? And let's draw a mask on here. Oh no, mask. Cool, mask. Awesome. So I had to change my exposure. No, I shouldn't have. Well, I did. So technically with the mount adapter, the camera read f5.6, but I thought that was trying to make it f8. I was compensating, you know, for the mount adapter because it does the math on the lens. I don't know why my exposure is dramatically different, but I will fix that in my correction layer here. Bringing down my highlights and my shadows so that, you know, I'm aiming for kind of the same spot as before, thereabouts. And I'm also a little less saturated, it would seem. So I can bump up my saturation a little bit. I don't know. So jumping from the 16 to 35 without the 0.71 mount adapter, just the regular mount adapter, and let me turn this off. There we go. Here to here, yeah, we do have a slight color shift, although I want to say I white balanced again. So I don't, theoretically there shouldn't be too much of a shift. What's interesting is there is like a little bit of smearing, and this I saw, I want to say in like Carlos Quintero's video. Like these are much closer, finer dots without the focal reducer mount adapter, the 0.71. I need to just come up with the right term to say. Whereas these are a little bit more spread out. So that means that, you know, there's glass in there, and that glass has coatings, and that's going to affect color a little bit. I would say it's not too far off, you know, from here to there. But yeah, it's causing it to be a little wider. And again, I'm not a colorist, so I can't really explain what that is. But, you know, the distances, once I brought up the saturation a little bit, the distances are pretty close. And this also, the saturation might also have to do a little bit that I exposed this brighter versus the other one. You know, I had to change some of the exposure, which changed some of the saturation. So I would say color-wise, we're in a spot where this doesn't seem too different. Now let's look at the thing I've been worried about is sharpness. So here is the Canon 16 to 35 at 35, f8 on the lens, the sharpness. So let's switch to my other workspace. And look at it 100% versus here. And again, the framing's not exactly the same. And I've got a glare on the one with the focal reducer, but it's not too far off. Like maybe it is just a touch sharper. All right, focal reducer, normal adapter, focal reducer, normal adapter. I think these are pretty close. It's close enough for me. So I'm gonna keep the focal reducer on the C70, at least for this lens. I don't see enough of a difference, and maybe you do. Although you're probably watching this on YouTube and you know, it may have been obliterated. All right, so this is the Sigma. The Sigma with the focal reducer, Sigma without. And again, I apologize, my framing isn't perfect. And my exposure is not exactly the same. But that's pretty close. to my eye. Sharp enough for me. Cool. All right, so now let's compare the color from the C200 to the C70. So these clips here are C-Log 3. Let me switch my view. Back here. All right, so this is 8-bit footage as well, because C-Log 1 and C-Log 3 on the C200 are 8-bit, and then if you switch it to RAW, I think just about everything, Final Cut, DaVinci Resolve, Premiere, decode it as C-Log 2. So this transform is going to be different. That's, you know, that's just how this is going to go. And it looks like I underexposed again. Oops. You know what? I was tired. I'm doing this on my own, so mistakes are made. Okay, so got that going. Let's kind of bring things up. Pull things down. And I want to say, yeah, white balanced again. And again, we're on the 16 to 35 at 35. Yeah, things are pointing, you know, a little differently. So let's hop into our Hue Saturation Curves. Let's just start bringing them in. All right, got my hue dots. Let's make them point where they gotta go. Whoops, other way. So my red is a little off. Magenta, yeah. Blue is way off. And this is a known issue with the C200. Like, blue skews wrong a lot. I would do like theater stuff under, you know, they're not the best. I would find myself under LED lighting that wasn't the best, but like something that needed to be blue always looked purple on the C200. And then I'd pull out my ESR, and I got tired and I didn't do the ESR test, but like things were off there. Let's hop back over here. Bump up my saturation. I'll try to get them in that halfway point again. And then kind of even them out. So I feel like, all right, let's just add these in. And I'm doing this so I can start from scratch. I probably could have pasted the attributes from my C70 footage just so I like already have these dots, but I wanted to start with a clean slate, I guess. Okay. I want a little more magenta. Maybe a little less cyan, right? Does that look even? I don't know. I don't have a ring. Thanks, Final Cut. All right, but now, theoretically, if we were to hop from here to there, my saturation's a little high. These would match. So let's jump back over here. This one, bring my saturation down just... Oh wait, am I looking at the right thing? What am I looking at? Yeah, right? This is what I'm... Yeah. Did I really? Okay, I can bring that up a little bit. And Final Cut does have like a compare your frames. I forget where that is. There's like pull up 2 frames at once and work on them. I just forget where that is. I'm not a colorist. And if you're a colorist, you're probably not doing it in Final Cut. But yeah, so if we look at our hue curves, you know, from this, let's bring this clip over. You know, from here to here. Turn this off. And let's just move this out of the way for now. Here's my hue and saturation curves. You know, these are different for sure. So like right out of the camera, C-Log 2 to C-Log 3, you know, if you're coloring by hand like this, it's going to be a little different. Now, let's do what I did with the C70 footage. Let's switch over to the lookup table. So I'm going to turn off my manual corrections, turn on my main corrections, and then apply, let's also turn off this stuff done by hand, and apply the Canon supplied Canon Log 3 lookup table and see how different those are. So that's my color. Lookup tables. Add the Canon Log 3, and it's not the Cinema Gamut, it's just the regular one, to WideDR. There we go, and I need to add some corrections. I need to add a little bit of, oh, and I need to make sure that this is happening before the lookup table. So the thing is with the lookup table, if I do it after the lookup table, I might hit certain barriers. You know, there might be extremes to this that I hit, and I won't be able to work beyond that. Like especially if I had a clip and I apply the lookup table and it's clipping, sometimes I know the data is still in there and I just need to work on it before the lookup table. That's kind of why I'm not using the one in the inspector. I want to do it because maybe I need to recover something that's clipping inside the lookup table, but I can bring it down before the lookup table so it doesn't clip because the data is there. That happens a lot with the Canon Log 2 or the Canon Cinema Raw Lite out of the C200. The Raw has a lot more data. The lookup table is causing it to clip, but I want to recover that. I have to do that before the lookup table. All right. Okay, so this is my lookup table with some corrections before, and my vector scope is definitely a little wonky. My skin tones are not on the line perfectly. The reds curve in away a little bit. The blue is definitely curving away. Again, known issue with the C200's 8-bit footage. And my magenta's lacking a little bit. So let's add a hue and saturation curve. Again, let's put it before the lookup table because this is considered a color correction. And let's do some fixing. Let's fix red. Red is... I can't really like fix the bend in the red. That's, yeah, something I can't quite do, but... Oh, and I guess I should have just added all of these ahead of time. Okay, I guess I can fix skin tone too. Alrighty, so yeah, red is pointing towards the box a little better. Magenta, there we go. Blue, this problematic child on this camera, and it's like curving weird. Cyan, green's a little off as well. I'm pretty sure I white balanced. I'm worried now that, like, did I not? Am I second guessing myself? That's also the problem I get for not taking notes or having anyone with me and doing this on my own. Yellow is very strong. Blue is lacking. So again, this whole line needs to shift over, but I'm gonna, I would just do it with these curves. So I'm gonna work on yellow on its own. Oh, also, yeah, my skin tone. Skin tones are off. There we go. Now people will look healthy. All right, back to saturation. There we go. Magenta, blue, cyan, and green. I don't know. I like to work from the bottom to the top. Okay, yellow, too saturated. Bring you down. Blue, not saturated enough. Oh no. Oh no, as I bring the blue saturation up, it's falling apart. But again, let's just make that dot point at it. It looks like a cobra, like a sideways cobra. Magenta could use a little boost, I think. And it's as I move it, also kind of moving like a cobra. Weird. Let's bring up green a touch. Maybe I got a blue. I can't bring up blue anymore, so maybe I'll just bring everything else down to meet blue, and then I'll just bring everything up. Again, the idea of like pushing and pulling, still true here. How's that? Is that more circular? Maybe bring magenta down a little bit. Yeah. All right. And then, yeah, what I can do is hop back over here and just bring up. Oh, but it's not doing it evenly. Again, because it's under the lookup table, so things are getting a little skewed. So again, pushing and pulling. Blue. Why are you the problem child of C200 8-bit footage? Okay, you know what? This is close enough. This is as close as I'm going to get it. But if I compare again, yeah, you know what? I can bring my saturation down a little bit in comparison to the C70 footage. That's on paper, that's right. But let me turn off my mask. That's not right. This looks black, but when I fix the colors, this looks purple. And this is kind of the problem with, that's part of the blue issue with the C200. Because these are right, but something in, the way that these are like bulging, that's not right. Again, I'm not a colorist. I probably would have just done that and that. And even though these aren't perfect to one another, it's like close enough for jazz. I'd probably live with that. Or I would try to use something like Cinematch or Film Convert to get it closer. All right, last thing. Let's compare this to, let me move this back over here. Move this back over here. Let's compare this with the, I could also compare the Sigma, but I'm getting tired here. And we're at almost an hour of me rambling on about color and sharpness. Let's just jump over to the C200 Raw. So this is 12-bit color. I believe it's 444 chroma subsampling, I think. I'm pretty sure. I don't know. I just work here, man. Okay, so let's draw a mask around this again. And cool. Again, this is C-Log2. The raw footage gets debayered as C-Log2. If you were in the Canon RAW tool, you could debayer it to whatever you want, C-Log3, YDR, but C-Log2 is going to give you the most dynamic range and most color information when you're debayering. So Final Cut, DaVinci Resolve, they just default to that. Let's do this one to the lookup table first. Yeah, so let's grab that lookup table. And theoretically, this C-Log2 should match up pretty closely to the C70 C-Log2. I don't know. And then let's correct for my underexposure. Push and pull a little bit, bring those highlights up, bring the shadows down. My blue is still a little off, and my red's stronger than my cyan. I don't know. I thought the raw was more accurate, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Let's add some hue saturation. Again, I want to put this before the lookup table because this is a correction. We got our green, and I only want green. We got our cyan, and I only want cyan. We got our blue. We got magenta. We got red. We got yellow. And we got skin tones. Okay, so C-Log2 coming out of the C200 with the lookup table. The lookup table's getting us pretty close. I would say green's a little off, blue's a little off, but all the rest are kind of pointed where they need to go. So let's get the green, let's get the blue. Oop. There we go. Yeah, minimal correction there. And let's fix some of the saturation. Let's balance some of this out. All right, so my reds are pretty hot. My magenta could be bumped a little bit. My blue, despite not being super color accurate, it was a little hot. Bring that in. Maybe too far. There we go. Cyan needs a boost. And green's pretty close. Maybe bring it in just a touch. Now, I noticed that once I made these changes, my magenta is a little bit off. Okay, so there we go. So again, theoretically, I should be able to slap this next to this and see something that's pretty Dang close. Let me also turn back on the mask. Okay. Yeah, this, with the amount of work, these are pretty close. Now, let's take a look at how much different they are. That correction versus that correction. So the C200 needed more correction to get closer. Here's the C70, even with the focal reducer and the C200. There were more corrections done to the C200. Now, let's say we didn't do this correction. Or this correction. How different do they look now? The blue on the C200 is a little more off. And the reds are both pretty strong, cyan's pretty weak. So it's really just that blue. And in fact, even the C70's blue is a little off. So I would say if I'm doing a production that the C70 is acting as a B cam for the C200, and they're both in C-Log2, in 10-bit C-Log2 and 12-bit C-Log Raw, C-Log2 essentially, these will match pretty well. I'm happy with that. Lastly, let's compare the sharpness of the Canon log to, okay, so let's copy these settings and paste them over here. Yeah. Okay, so let's hop over to my sharpness, kind of pixel peep workspace. Yeah. And bounce between here, here. And let's see it without the speed booster. Okay. So here's the C200, here's the C70. C200, C70, and one of my lights died. And you know what? I would say the C200 Raw does look a little sharper. Let's jump in closer. C70, C200, C70, C200. Now maybe this, maybe the C200 is a little more contrasty. Maybe if I bring my shadows down a little darker. That might be too dark. C200, C70, C70, C200, C70. Yeah. And that might be the added file size, because this is, the C200 is a gigabit per second, and the C70 is, 160 megabits per second, and it's 444 versus 422. That can attribute to some of the sharpness difference. Here's the focal reducer version, and let's bring its shadows down a little darker too. So C70, C200, C70, C200. It's crazy. They're both 4K. C200, looks like there's still an advantage to film raw if like detail and sharpness is your goal. And honestly, that makes sense. These files are 10 times bigger out of the C200 Raw. You know, here's this C200 C70 C200 8-bit versus the Raw. Let me bring its exposure up. You know, let's get these closer. Yeah, I mean, the 8-bit 420 doesn't hold up to the C200's Raw either. I hope that was informative. It was to me. It looks like the sharpest thing I have is the C200 in Raw, probably followed by the C70 in 10-bit 422, and then lastly the C200's 8-bit 420 in terms of detail. And it looks like I'm getting a little bit of softness with the focal reducer, but not a ton. And it looks like you can match the color of the C200 Raw and the C70 422 10-bit pretty easily. You know, even if I didn't color correct it, like the blues would be a little off, but with a little color correction, they look pretty close. This was a long video. If you stuck through it, hey, kudos, and let's come back tomorrow and do something fun. We don't have to do a deep dive. All right, see you tomorrow. Peace.